You know, there are so many people here, and you know everything about how important it is that you are here. So it's really, really seriously hard to think of what I can say that will bring anything new into this room. But I do realize that some of us are probably thinking about why are we fighting this battle over and over again, right? We can't believe we're fighting the same battle, right? And we are also maybe have a few other things in our lives, so we're not quite aware that pretty exactly the same bad stuff is coming into the Pennsylvania state legislature as into the Texas state legislature, so we don't quite know what the challenge is. And so for all of us, I just want to remind us today that there is no deeper, more important, more widespread, more consequential issue than reproductive freedom as a fundamental human right. It is at least as basic as freedom of speech or freedom of assembly, perhaps more so. It is the reason why we are gathered here together, and so I just want to go back to basics for a minute and remind us that controlling reproduction is the first step in every hierarchy. If we did not have wombs, we would be fine, right? To control reproduction, you have to control women's bodies. And that means the necessity of deciding who owns people in systems of legitimacy, how many workers, how many soldiers, and of course, it ends up meaning that half of the population is supposed to control the other half, which you can't do without violence or aggression, unequal gender roles, the threat of control, without all of those things, which is why it is the first step in hierarchy rather than democracy. Those motives to keep gender separate, to keep women slightly subordinate or really subordinate to men, those motives are increased wherever there is a strong racial system, class system, caste system, as in India. That is increased because in order to keep that separation and that visible difference in the long term, you have to control reproduction. So it is utterly clear that the systems of sexism and racism or caste or class are intertwined. There is no such thing as being successfully pro-choice or feminist or an egalitarian without also being anti-racist and against caste and class. They cannot possibly be uprooted except together. But I do think that part of the tyranny and the success of hierarchical systems that have come upon us and that are rather new in human history is that they are supposed to be part of human nature, and they are not. They are not. This period of time in which we have had gender, in which we have had women controlled as the means of reproduction, is relatively new in human history, maybe 5% if you consider the hundreds of thousands of years we have been on this earth. And I think that that's helpful to understand because especially on this continent, it was only 500 or 600 years ago that women in Native American cultures controlled their own bodies and decided when and whether to have children. Indeed, a lot of the languages, Cherokee and many of the other languages here, before Europeans showed up, did not have gender, did not have he or she. People were people. What a concept. And women friends in Indian country make jokes about, because you have to have a sense of humor to survive, right? Make jokes about what did Columbus consider primitive? Equal women. When I have been in Southern Africa and I have gone out into the fields with women who are from the Kwe and the San, the original cultures. I mean, we all came from these cultures, right? The Kwe and the San. We all came from there. And they take me out into the land and show me the herbs that they use for contraception and abortifacient and headaches and migraine headaches. I mean, incredibly sophisticated use of herbs that they have always understood. So that helps me somehow, you know, to understand that it is not human nature to be hierarchical, to be ranked rather than linked, which we truly are. To have the ranking that starts with controlling women's bodies as the means of reproduction. And it's interesting to look back at our own history in this country and realize that because of the cultures of balance, cultures in which the paradigm was the circle, not the hierarchy, right, that seemed to have been by and large Native American cultures, it was the women of the Iroquois Confederacy in upstate New York, especially the Seneca women, who inspired the suffragist movement. I mean, they were together. There were no reservations. They were going to the same little stores. And the Seneca women were appalled by the situation of European American women. They referred to them as those who die in childbirth. They could not believe that they had been deprived by centuries and centuries, and the burning of witches, who were healthcare workers, of course, in Europe, of their right to control their own bodies. Elizabeth Cady Stanton had the last of her many children by natural methods, having been inspired and instructed by Native American women. And you know, we have yet to really explore these connections and understand that we would be way better off if we began history of human beings when human beings started, and not just when Columbus showed up, right? Or not just when colonialism started or monotheism started. So I find comfort in looking at original cultures and in seeing the connections between reproductive freedom that we are here to establish and democracy itself. Without taking that first step of inequality, of controlling reproduction, we have a chance at democracy and communal forms of government which existed in the past. And the connection is there to everything between reproductive freedom and everything else. You know, they say God is in the details, right? I think the goddess is in connections. So we see, for instance, that part of the reason for global warming is because women have been deprived of the ability to decide when and whether to have children, have been forced to have children too young, children they could not care for in so many areas of the world, and that has meant a concentration of population that has caused great suffering because every child has the right to be born, loved, and cared for, right? And also has become a cause of the deepest and the most fundamental cause of global warming. In this country, there have been all kinds of efforts to repress birth control and even sex education, outlawing abortion. You know, the efforts to instill and enforce patriarchy and hierarchy are definitely with us. It is nothing less than nationalizing a woman's body to declare a relationship between the law and a fertilized egg. That is actually nationalizing women's bodies. And I think we are beginning to expand the understanding of bodily integrity. Perhaps we are moving towards a legal principle called bodily integrity, which means that the power of the state stops at our skins, male or female. That we cannot be subject to pressure for organ transplants, to involuntary testing, to forced pregnancy. The power of the state stops at our skins. I don't know what it will be called, but I think that is our next legal principle. Now, in this election, hello, there could not possibly be a more clear choice, right? Since I come from New York, I feel a little responsibility. Not that we move in the same circles. But since the first reason that is given in public opinion polls for supporting Donald Trump is that he is a successful businessman, I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, he is a failure as a businessman. He is a successful con man. It is very, very different. If he had just invested the money he inherited as a rich kid, the Wall Street Journal or somebody has figured out that he would be way richer than now. He has gone through so many bankruptcies and so many disgraces. You know, I don't know how, I don't want to repeat, but I just want to say from the bottom of my heart that he should be hospitalized, not elected. Now, we are probably all going through the pain of the false equivalency in this election, right? That elevates him and humiliates and downgrades her just even by the equal division of time, or the idea that there could be any equal division of positive or negative questions. And in addition, I think we need to remember swift boating? Remember John Kerry, who was a war hero, and who was done in his presidential attempt by disqualifying what was good about him, not attacking what was good, not what was bad. We need to remember that that's what's happening to Hillary, precisely because she is the most accurate of all the candidates. Every fact-checking service says this. Precisely because she is the most trustworthy, she is being attacked as crooked Hillary. And we need to understand that and be immune to it, which is hard, right? Personally, I would take all of her emails and put them in a book and sell the book, because they show how hard she works, how she gets up in the morning at 6 o'clock to help people, how she's taking care, connected to family at this, it makes absolutely no sense, the kind of accusations that are directed at her. But I think it has an impact on us even when we don't think it does. When somebody is being bullied, that you kind of withdraw from that person out of fear that you might be bullied too. Or when someone has been sexually assaulted, there's a bit of an effort to say, wait a minute, maybe if I don't go into that neighborhood, or I don't wear those clothes, I won't be sexually assaulted too. I think we need to be aware of a feeling of fear that causes us to question or withdraw from somebody lest we share their fate. And I think that she, who has been so into the processes of democracy, is also being penalized for the fact that out of a group effort, you do not get the ideal solution. It is the nature of democracy that you come together in your diversity and produce the best you can. But what is true of Hillary in all of my years of watching her is that wherever she has been, it is better than it would have been without her. Now, and then there's also the notion that we are voting for her just because she is a woman, which, you know, is a, do you get this as an accusation sometimes? Just point out Sarah Palin. We did not support Sarah Palin. So the first point is, or Clarence Thomas for that matter, okay? The point is the content first, the content of people who stand for the majority interests and the welfare. It is the content first. And then after that, if you have someone who, like Barack and Michelle Obama, understand what it is to live in this country as an African American person, that is great, because there is an empathy and an understanding that doesn't otherwise exist. And if you have Hillary Clinton who knows what it's like to live in a female body, it makes a huge difference. So first comes content, then comes form, but both are crucial and important. And finally, you know, I think we should remember that because most of us were raised by women, I mean, there are way more men being loving and nurturing to children now than ever before, but still most of us were raised by female human beings, and so we may associate female authority with childhood. It's emotional, it's nurturing, it's irrational maybe because, or threatening maybe because we're little and our parents are big. I mean, there are all kinds of things that come from our experience of parenting. We as women have our own example to the contrary, but I think there's some men for whom she is threatening because the last time they saw a powerful woman, they were 8, you know, and they feel regressed to childhood by seeing her. This is deep, right? And it's not going to go away, this resistance to leadership from the female half, the females of all races and ethnicities, until we are not only raising our daughters more like our sons, but our sons more like our daughters, so that both, absolutely both, are whole human beings, and that is our goal. But I do believe that when we see, as I have seen campaigning around the country, a few people who are actually were for Bernie and are now for Trump, I mean, this does not make sense, okay? This is about projecting your hopes on a new face. This is about a hatred of Washington or a hatred of your situation. It is not about anything rational in terms of what is going to improve our situation and that of everyone around us. So I hope we address the enthusiasm gap and understand that Hillary is our representative, the most experienced candidate we have ever had, perhaps, for the presidency. And I know, too, there's sometimes a little bit of an age gap, though way less than is emphasized in the press. And it was always there because older women felt that they would never again have the chance to see a woman president. And younger women said, yeah, no, I'll have a lot of chances to, right? But if we address these reasons and look at the substance and the content of the great heart of Hillary Clinton, I think that we will all not just defeat Trump, but defeat him big, huge. And finally, to come back to my first point about how what we are all here for is the single most important concern that we could possibly have, which is reproductive freedom as a fundamental human right, at least as important as freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. I would like to recommend to you a book called Sex and World Peace, which has definitively proved in every current country in the world that the biggest indicator of whether a country will be violent inside itself or will be willing to use military violence against another country is actually not poverty, not access to natural resources, not religion, or even degree of democracy. It's violence against females. That is the biggest indicator. And that is because, not because female life is any more precious than male life, but because, once again, it is the first thing we see because of systems that try to control reproduction and therefore women. And it is the understanding of that as an element in our foreign policy is something that Hillary Clinton has as a candidate, and I'm not sure I've ever seen any other candidate that did. She knows that the status of women must be an element in our foreign policy. And that when we fail to make it an element in our foreign policy, we make big mistakes. We supported the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in spite of the fact that they went to war against their more secular government for 3 reasons. Girls were being allowed to go to school, women had to give their permission to marry, and women were able to go to political meetings. They're an extremely gender polarized culture, and we armed them. We armed them. And this was the beginning of so much. That she understands how to make it an element of a more humane and connected and effective foreign policy is going to be a huge, huge step in history. Now, we have a lot of things to do here. I know we have to eliminate Illinois' version of the Hyde Amendment, and we have to get rid of parental consent, which is causing enormous damage. And so we have all the forms of it here that we need to work on. And I would just like to say that this personal PAC is the example that every other state in this nation needs. We are partly suffering because we have, as movements, the women's movement too, has paid way more attention to Washington than to state legislatures. And that's why we see kids graduating in huge debt, because the state legislatures are building prisons with money that should go to state universities. There are 30 states in which prisons are profit centers. Hello? This is not possible. I mean, there's so much going on in our state legislatures, including redistricting themselves into perpetuity and changing the face of Congress by redistricting. So, personal PAC is the example that absolutely every state in this country needs. You were there with great pioneering. You are the example we need to follow now. There is no better place to invest our money and our support than in this organization that is a model for the country that will not only make Illinois perfect, but will make so many other states more tolerable if they follow this example. And I am grateful to Personal PAC and to all of you in this room for giving us a state that will and is leading the way. Now, all of those things are big and deep, but there's also something that is very personal about what we're doing, right? I mean, it's the lives we see around us. It is very, very, very intimate. And those rewards will come to us in an intimate way. So I would like to end by reading you the dedication of my road book, because it is a thank you to everybody in this room. This book is dedicated to Dr. John Sharp of London, who in 1957, a decade before physicians in England could legally perform an abortion for any reason other than the health of the woman, took the considerable risk of referring for an abortion a 22-year-old American on her way to India. Knowing only that she had broken an engagement at home to seek an unknown fate, he said, "You must promise me two things. First, you will not tell anyone my name. Second, you will do what you want to do with your life." Dear Dr. Sharp, I believe you, who knew the law was unjust, would not mind if I say this so long after your death. I've done the best I could with my life. This book is for you. And I say to each of you, this gratitude is to you.